Shin Godzilla originally came to my attention when a couple months ago it went viral for being mixed with this song. The movie was released in 2016. The directors are Ano Hideki and Higuchi Shinji. Ano was also the writer of the script. The stars are Hagisawa Hiroki, Takanuchi Yutaka, and Ishihara Satomi. They are all talented and established actors even before this movie. Also, it makes complete sense why they're in this movie, based on their past work. The movie begins with, I guess, the Japanese Coast Guard finding an abandoned boat in Tokyo Bay. At the same time, the Tokyo Aqualine, which is the underwater, highway, ends up being cracked, and this weird red slime starts to fall in, as well as water. This is a personal nightmare for me personally, not totally sure where that fear came from. Now, as the viewer, you can kind of see the movements in the water of Godzilla. This is going to be a common theme that the Japanese government is going to be a few steps behind whatever is happening. Except for our main character, Yaguchi Rando. He is the Deputy Chief Cabinet Secretary, and he had already seen a viral video of what appears to be a tail moving around. And after that, they are going to have a conference that is going to claim that the monster is not going to make landfall, so they don't need to worry about it. It is clearly enormous, and there is no way that it would survive on land. In this middle of this conference where they're promising that Godzilla is not going to come into mainland, Godzilla comes into the mainland. At this point, Godzilla is obviously adapted for living underwater. There aren't really arms, and the legs don't seem strong enough to really support it bipedally. It's really just kind of crawling around on the streets, but it's big enough to cause a little bit of a problem. Also, it repeatedly keeps releasing some liquid that looks like blood. So I'm assuming it's the same liquid that started pouring into the cart tunnels. It's definitely radioactive, which I will eventually get to talking about in more depth later. This movie's version of Godzilla adapts to its environment, so it really doesn't take long before it decides to grow some leggies. I will say that previous Godzilla designs looked a little bit like an iguana that mutated into being a Tyrannosaurus Rex. This Godzilla looks painful. It looks like a creature that has been devastated and transformed by nuclear waste. This Godzilla does not look like she is having a good time. It takes Godzilla 3 hours to go 8 miles, so it's time for her to Godzilla evolve, which is like Digivolving, but it's Godzilla. But all that growing arms and legs causes for Godzilla to get a little hot. So it gets up and just walks back to the ocean. So after World War II, Japan was forbidden from engaging in war and having a standing army. The United States has a treaty with Japan that promises military protection if they are to be attacked. So the Japanese government is really hoping that the United States will step up, or there is a high chance that they could be in some serious trouble. The government declared a state of emergency. It's difficult to guess where Godzilla might pop up next. It is an island nation after all, and the trajectory, although so far seems as though she is heading towards Tokyo. It is an incredibly heavily populated city, and getting that many people out of Tokyo at a moment's notice is just not realistic. Yaguchi is placed in the position of leadership over a task force that is trying to find out as much about Godzilla as they possibly can. One of the first things they need to discuss is the enormous amount of radiation Godzilla releases. That isn't exactly ideal, and it turns out that Godzilla is energized by nuclear fission. So, when she starts to get too hot due to her rapid adaptations, she has to go back to the water in order to cool down. To me, this is a pretty obvious reference to the nuclear disaster in Fukushima. The critical failure in Fukushima plant occurred due to an earthquake that led to a meltdown. The only way that this could have stopped was by funneling in water to the plant. This caused the core to cool down. It's a very similar concept as to what is going on with Godzilla. The United States had been taking samples of Godzilla and disappeared, not offering Japan a lot of information. This feels a little bit of an attempt to cover up the nuclear mutations occurring in Japanese waters, because we, the United States, are the reason there is so much radiation in Japanese waters. A Japanese-American woman named Kyoko Ann Peterson ends up meeting with Yaguchi. She's either the daughter of the president, a senator, or a diplomat. I don't remember really. Anyway, point is, she has a clearance that Yaguchi does not have and an intel on what America is planning on doing. She's a pretty good actress, but man, she is not comfortable in English. She is able to bring them the information about a former zoologist that had been trying to share concerns about a monster similar to a Godzilla eventually arriving. Goro Maki had been studying the effects of radiation on an organism and how that might result in mutations of the creature. Obviously, he was completely correct. He called the monster that would eventually exist Godzilla. The boat that had been abandoned in the bay at the beginning of the movie was his, so we can assume that things did not go well for him. More importantly, Godzilla finally starts to look like the Godzilla we all know and love. She's a lot bigger than the last time we saw her, and that means she's going to be moving a lot faster. When Godzilla makes landfall, she ends up in Kamakura. That's only 32 miles away from Tokyo, and that's probably a lot easier for her because she doesn't have to abide by traffic laws. The Prime Minister approved the defense squad from using anything that they could to stop Godzilla from getting any closer to Tokyo. They go through 8 squads of helicopters, and they are totally out of ammunition. That's when they decide to bring the United States in. The US sends stealth bombers. They are planning on bombing the hell out of the area to kill Godzilla, but there are still a lot of people that are going to be directly in the line of fire, so they are trying to evacuate. And when Godzilla knocks out the power to the city, people begin to panic. The evacuation orders reach the area that the Prime Minister and the task force are in. Originally, the Prime Minister refused to walk away from this. He doesn't want to leave the area because he knows there are people that aren't going to be able to get out in time. He changes his mind pretty quickly when people point out that he is needed when this is over with. So he agrees to get out of there, and he is heading to the helicopter when the bombing begins. It's far enough away that it's not too much of a concern yet. They have a little bit of time. The bombs start dropping on Godzilla, and it does kind of seem like this should be like the big ending. After the bombs finish dropping off their first round, Godzilla begins to glow bright purple. I guess this is technically 4.0 because when Godzilla opens her mouth, she is releasing a nuclear laser, which is hitting the planes so that they explode. And then, at the end of her tail, another laser starts going off. It's when that tail started that the laser managed to hit the helicopter that the Prime Minister had gotten on. The country is totally devastated by this attack, but thankfully, it seems to have taken Godzilla out for a little while. She ends up being totally frozen, standing there while her body cools off. Now that she doesn't need the ocean to do such a thing, it's time to be a little concerned. But it does buy them some time. After such trauma, there are a lot of people that are really having a hard time focusing on the plan at hand. Yaguchi is not one of them. He knows that they need to think calmly and rationally about what they're going to be doing next. It's a lot of planning and trying to maneuver around the red tape. It is a strong incentive for them to do something to permanently stop Godzilla. Kyoko notifies Yaguchi that the United States has plans to drop a nuclear bomb that is stronger than Nagasaki. It has been approved by the United Nations, and Kyoko is having a really hard time with this as she doesn't want to watch Japan get bombed for a third time. While she is American, her grandmother is from Japan, and she doesn't want to see the country bombed for a third time in such a way. Weirdly, though, in the beginning stages of the planning that we have a reference to the 1999 movie, where she relays the information that the United States said they would do the same thing to Japan if Godzilla ended up in New York. I'm sure that there are other references I missed, but it's just been a really long time since I watched the Godzilla movies, and honestly, this one just was kind of funny to me. They end up having a little more than 2 weeks to get millions of people out of the Tokyo area, which isn't enough time, but they do manage to get a little bit more extra time. But Japan is able to convince France to help them buy a little bit more time. The plan is essentially to pump Godzilla full of coagulant agent. It's going to cause the body to freeze and cool down the radiation. We have reached the end of the movie. Yaguchi decides to remain in the blast zone, aware that Godzilla is just super radioactive. This is very reminiscent of the people that sacrifice themselves to cool down the Fukushima nuclear power plant. Anyone that is in the zone of Godzilla is given a 50-hour curfew, which is probably meant to protect them from the radiation. They use bullet trains remotely manned to get Godzilla's attention. Some of the special effects are pretty bad, but I'm fine with that because it does remind me of the old movies. It's still plenty entertaining. The trains push Godzilla to go towards buildings that have been outfitted by bombs, so it forces her to keep moving while also causing some damage, specifically for her to fall over, which gives them enough time to get the trucks out there to pump the coolant into her mouth. She's able to wake up enough to nuke the trucks, but she is a lot slower now. This plan seems to be working, although she hasn't been put down quite yet. That's when the bullet trains are used again, and this time they are used, with bombs to knock her over. This part is a little ridiculous, but I do respect it. This time, she was forced to go down for a lot longer, and I did get a little stressed waiting to see if she would wake up again, and how far they would be able to fill her up. And to her credit, Godzilla does get up. She manages to attack these trucks, but her tails stop being able to laser out, and it falls down onto the ground. Her skin starts to get stiff, the coagulant working perfectly fine, all the point where she is frozen solid where she stands. The bad news is that there are 3.6 million refugees. The good news is that Godzilla's nuclear isotopes have a very short half-life, so you only have to wait 2 to 3 years for it to be totally gone. So at least there is a chance that they can rebuild the area. The downside is that there is a pretty high chance that Godzilla will wake up. There is a reminder that Japan has managed to survive something horrific, and they will survive again. As for Yaguchi, it seems as though he's going to have some opportunity to be a major player in the new government. It also seems as though he and Kyoko may make a cute couple. This movie's pretty good. It's pretty decent. My one qualm with it is that it does sometimes take on a Japanese nationalist tone, which is slightly concerning. It's entertaining. I do enjoy how goofy Godzilla looks. Like, yes, most of the time it looks intense and it's a little unsettling, but the eyes just sometimes ended up looking like googly eyes. Like, if you shook her really hard, they'd just bounce everywhere. The acting was fine except for Kyoko's English speaking. I understand her purpose. Her being Japanese American added an interesting layer. She has a connection to the land and she doesn't want to hurt people, but she is also working for America. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Amanda. This has been Horror Historian. Next time I will be doing Wreck. As for would I survive this? Probably. Like, I'm not staying in a building if Godzilla is making landfall. I'm out of there. You can follow me on Twitter, TikTok, and Ko-fi. Ko-fi, I think it's like $2. TikTok, I'm usually posting actual real life spooky stuff or just horrible things that have happened in history. And then on Twitter, I sometimes like things.